Hello, hi Nourdin. We are here recording a small session where Nourdin wanted to ask me some questions about how we set up the runners. The new UI is built using Vue and GraphQL, and I just want to walk him through how it works. I'll share my screen. Okay, so let me see. Yeah, so this is the new UI for the runners. It was built originally, this UI was built many years ago, about 4 years ago, using Haml and Rails. And now we're trying to shift a little bit more to use Vue, GraphQL, and new GraphQL APIs. So what we're doing is basically take exactly the way the UI looked before and migrating everything to Vue. The reason we're doing this is because we are not going through a design phase due to the setup of the team. It takes a little bit longer to get the mocks, but we wanted to do a technical iteration and just move everything to Vue so that we can later do some more things about the design. Yeah, so this is the page. This is the runners page. It's under admin/runners. I do the demo here in my local because I don't want to use something that we are using in staging or public. And let me think. And this is the page. So I think, Nourdin, you were asking me about the entry points. So how does it start? So the way it starts is by adding a small tag to the page. So here we add a div that has the ID that says JES admin runners. If I go to this page source, you will see that actually this HTML doesn't exist in the page when we load it the first time. If it works. It decided to get slow now. So this HAML, yeah, so this HTML should load this div here. And at the same time, in the same page, we put this index.js file that is going to mount the runner app inside this div and replace it. So the HTML should appear someday here. Oh yeah, cool. So I'm gonna search for this tag. Yeah, and here is this div. It's an empty div, right? So this empty div contains a little bit like it contains the ID that we need and a few extra pieces of data that we want directly in the page, that we want to load directly in the page. And that is coming from the HAML. So I go back to the HAML, and the HAML has this data. It has the registration token that we want to load in the HTML. It has this install help page. This is here because it's hard-coded. And the active runners count is also here because it's easier to calculate it in the HAML than load it from GraphQL because we don't have a GraphQL API for this. We still have this feature behind a feature flag. So if you see here, this is only when this feature is enabled that we place this in the page. I could disable it and show the old UI still. So I think this should be removed, this milestone. But for now, we're gonna mount the app here. So when I load the page for the first time, JavaScript is gonna find this tag, this div, and then it's going to mount the app inside. I'm gonna refresh. Maybe we'll see a little bit white, and then it takes a few seconds, and then you can see that the app is mounting. This mounts this app, what I call the admin runners app .view. And this is the page. This is basically all the contents of the page, but it's as you can see, it's a bit small. It's not a very long file because it loads mostly components from other places. So for example, the runner type help is a component that goes inside this column. So it's the one that you will see here. And I'm going to open it just to show you. Yeah, so it's just mostly content. It's not doesn't have much logic, doesn't have any methods or anything. So it's just kind of like a content component. And next to it, we have the runner manual setup help. So I'm going to open this as well. And this has a little bit more logic because we want to display a slightly different message if you have the runners, if they are the admin runners or the shared runners. This here, we're setting up a shared runner. So shared appears here. And then it shows up here. And we have a little bit of logic to display the registration token as a mask value, for example, so that it appears behind this I. I can also reset the registration token, so this logic will be in this component, and so on and so on. So we can go deeper. It gets rendered by different components that are one inside the other, just to keep components a little bit easier to manage and small. The admin runners page has the responsibility of loading the runners, so that's important. So if you see here in Apollo, this Apollo keyword is the one that tells our Apollo plugin. So I'm going to show you where it's mounted. If you have any questions, please stop me, because maybe I'm too deep into this. So I give this here. I create an Apollo client, and then I pass it to the Vue app. So then when I use Apollo as a keyword, this Apollo provider knows what to do with this Apollo. And then what that does is that it creates some data inside the component, and then this data can pass down to the rest of the components. In this case, this data is the runners. So the runners are coming from this GraphQL query. And this GraphQL query, I'm gonna search it here. You can find it, it's imported here, and then I can open this file. So this is one of the different queries we have. These queries happen to live right next to our components for the runners that are here. So here we have different queries and different mutations. I think I have them already open. Yeah, so these are the runners. It simply is called get runners, and then we load all the runners information, but we have to paginate them. So that's why we have to send these extra parameters to paginate the different runners. Let me see. So for example, I'm gonna open the runner nodes to show you the data that we load. This is the data that we load to display each of the runners in the table. So as you can see, we have the ID. We have things like the short, what is something called the short SHA, which is this short token, the description, the version, the IP address. So all of this is loaded by GraphQL using this query. And yeah, and we can also run this using GraphQL, this demonstration environment. And here I did the same thing. So here, this is basically the data that gets loaded onto the Vue component. Yeah. Do you have any questions about this part?
So far, so good.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I loaded all the, so now that I loaded all the data here, then I can pass it to the lower components. So I load the runners data from this query here. Apollo helps to do most of the logic of fetching. So I can tell it how to fetch it, when to fetch it. I tell it
On
which
that,
field
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah. No.
Just to confirm my understanding, Apollo, I assume at this stage, it's just some sort of library that helps with making AJAX requests. That's basically
exactly.
That's correct.
So Apollo is well, they call it a platform, but it's basically in this case a plugin that we use that gets added to Vue so that we can load data easily using GraphQL queries.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for confirming. Yeah.
It's possible to write this a little bit different and just fetch the data ourselves, passing the query. But here we just tell Apollo kind of what to do and how to update the data. Yeah, so I do a little bit of error handling. we're using Sentry to report errors. So if there's any issue here, I send it to Sentry using these methods called report to Sentry. And then this helps me also see if there are any issues in the UI that we cannot catch, that we cannot see ourselves, because it's an admin section. Sometimes we will not be able to log in ourselves in GitLab.com to see what's going on. So we can use Sentry to have a little bit of visibility on what's going on, what's the errors, the possible errors are. Yeah, I pass it a few filters. These filters for the runners come from basically from the URL. So if I filter, for example, by active, I think I don't have any active ones. Oh yeah, they're active, but they are not online. So here we will update the URL, and that way, when I reload the page, this URL will feed the variables here into the page. So this is already filtered. Maybe I can put something more interesting. I'm gonna say filter only project runners. Yeah, so here we have only a few. And now if I refresh, I should see only the ones that are the project ones. Yeah, and then I can also sort by something else, and you will also see it gets updated here. So there's a connection between the search, what I call the search object, to the variables that we use to filter the runners by, and the URL. So those three things are connected using these functions here, the runner search utils. So here I can convert from one to the other, from the URL to the search, from the search to the URL when the user updates, and from the search to the variables. So from the current state of the search to the variables that are used to feed the runner the GraphQL query with some parameters. Yeah, and that's all about the folder structure. So I created the apps inside admin runners because we're going to have a few other apps that are going to be added for each context. So we're going to have the group runners, and this is already added over here. This is not merged, so you will not see it yet, but it's in progress. And here I'm starting to build the runners app. But the important thing is that the components get reused by the different apps. So I try to write these components so that they apply to the admin and to the groups. So for example, the runner list will look the same for both. I think I can already demo that. So I'm gonna go to a group. This group has a couple of runners attached to it already. And I already added a page called runners. This is behind the feature flag, so you may have to enable it. And as you can see, we reuse, it's a very similar UI because we reuse almost all the components that we used in the other page. But the data will be different. So here you will see all the runners. I think, yeah, it's few. I think I have like 100 set up, but here you will see only a few that are attached to this group. And as you can see here, we don't have a search yet. So because this is in progress. And the query looks similar, but it's not quite the same. So to get the group runners, I need to go first to the group and then load its runners. So that's how it always works in GraphQL, that you're kind of traversing the entities. And here I'm just going directly for the runners, for the top level runners. This is for admins, and this is for group owners. Yeah, and GraphQL lets us reuse a few things. So using these imports, I can import a fragment, and then that fragment is the same for both, right? It's the same for the group runners and for the admin runners. I think we had the example of the locked field. I think you were asking us about that. Let me see. Yeah, so here is the log.
I was even looking into that, and I realized aside from JavaScript having the question mark, We will also face the trouble with having a question mark in GraphQL objects.
Yeah. I don't know if this is, I've never tried if this is correct or not.
this did not work for me, and searching on Google Stack Overflow, it didn't seem like a straightforward process.
Right.
Given that you are doing this for the group page as well, and you're already making progress, I then suggested in the issue that, let's just move away from question mark.
Yeah, that's right. For example, if we wanted to add a new field into this page, what we would do is to find it in the API. So I can go to the runner. I think it's called CI runner, and then find the field that we want, right? So let's say, imagine it was the which one we don't have? I think we have all of them in this page. I don't know, the access level. So you could add it here. Oh yeah, it's not there. So you could add it here, and then this will give it to you already in the data, right? Because this data would load the runners with this access level now, and then you could start showing it. So I'm gonna try it just as an example. I'm gonna go to runner list, and then I think I could get away with just doing this here. So I could say item.access level. And I think that should be enough for us to show the access level of the runner in this UI.
If that doesn't end up working, you can also just show me in the XHR response, and I'll believe that response.
Right. Yeah, cool. So this is the access level. I think this has to do with if the runner can run protected branches or not. So this is the access level here. And if you want to see the request, so the request goes out with a query, right? So this is a query. It's just sends it as a string. It's a very long string with each of the fields that I added. And then here you can see the result contains the nodes. Oh, it's a bit slow. The nodes and the page info. The page info is something about if we have the next page or not. And here we should start getting the access level here, right? In the JSON file. This is also why we shouldn't have a question mark logged, because JSON, I don't know how this would be interpreted in JSON. I think it may work, but it's not great. Yeah, so that's the change that you would do. And what's cool is that now that I added it to this file, this file is reused by the group runners as well. So we should see the same change in the group runners. Yeah, so it's already refreshed. So as we update, we can reuse the UI in both pages. And when we want to create also the project runners, we will hopefully do something similar and just do variations depending on the requirements. Maybe the project runners doesn't make sense to show the type, because we know the type is always the project type or something like that. Just an example. Or in the admin area, you always have the possibility of deleting a runner because you're the admin. But in the group, you may not have the possibility of deleting the runner. You may only, I don't know, remove it from the group or something like that. Or you may not access its details. So we have to vary a little bit the UI on this.
Yeah, depending on the role you have within the group, right?
Yeah, exactly. And depending on the requirements of the UI. Yeah, and that's all. I would say the most difficult part to understand of this app is the search. So because there is a lot of a lot of logic about the search, how the search gets transformed from a URL into the filters that we pass to GraphQL, and how does the current GraphQL filters gets passed back, because the data structures of the filter bar are different from the URL data structure, and they are different from the thing that we pass to GraphQL. So we have to do a lot of conversions back and forth between the three, and then that happens to be this file. But I think it was hard for me to understand to create this. So yeah, I kind of have to think, okay, when do we need to transform from URL to search? And what does the search have to contain? Initially, I thought the search only contained the filters, but we also need to put the pagination in there, because the pagination should also go to the URL. And the pagination also goes to the GraphQL, because I tell it which page I'm in to tell him which runners to load, right? So all of this is kind of logic heavy, but the rest is mostly like loading information of the runners and rendering them. And the next challenge is going to be how to make this more extensible, so that the group runners UI can change and be different from the admin runners, and that we can still reuse components and not just rebuild everything. I have a little bit of a challenge, because group runners, the group runner spec, so the tests look very similar to the admin runner spec. This is almost the same file at the moment. It's almost the same tests, like with some small differences. Oh, okay, I think this is in another MR. All right, I'll open. Yeah, so I'm working on the filters for the group of runners. This file is mostly reused. The Vue file is mostly reused, so it doesn't change much. But the specs are very similar. So I'm gonna open this file here. Oh, yeah. So this file almost contains the same tests. Do we show the runner type help, the instructions, and the list? And then what happens when there are no filters? And then what happens when there are some filters? And then I do exactly the same thing in the group runners. The help, the instructions, the lists, no filters, some filters. And it's very duplicated. So the components themselves are not, they're mostly reused, but for to test these features, there's a lot of repetition, because the admins and the group owners have a lot of overlap in the features that they use. So that I was trying to do something nice about this, but I think I'm just gonna kind of duplicate the code for that.
Yeah, iteration, right?
Yeah, and figure out if I can think of something better later. It's also likely that the features will change. So I'm already working on an MR where we add a few more. This looks awful, but we add a few more settings for the group runners that don't exist for the admins. And this already means that I have to update the specs quite a lot. So it's not going to be as duplicated as before. So it's going to be okay to duplicate a bit. Yeah, do you have any more questions about how it works?
No, for the scope of this call, I think this was perfect. I have
cool.
a pretty good overview of what you've done.
Start to ask questions when you're being recorded like this.
Nice. You did a great job at demonstrating what has happened. So far, I think I'm on the same page.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot. And yes, I'm going to stop recording, and thanks a lot.